What's up, everybody? It's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast, Monday morning edition. I don't know when you're listening to this, but for me, it's Monday morning. I had an awesome weekend, enjoyed a lot of time with my family. Not much in the sports front this weekend, but that doesn't mean I don't have plenty to talk to you about. So, hope you had a great one. Hopefully, you are listening to this because you are subscribed on iTunes. That's the best way for me. I hope it's the best way for you, because that means every time I post one of these episodes, it gets pushed straight to your phone, to your computer, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It's good for me, and I don't charge you anything, so what's good for me is good for you, because it makes me feel good about myself before I hit record. Anyway, the big thing I've been thinking about this week is fantasy football, because you know, if you've read anything from me, that I'm not the biggest fantasy football fan in the world. I've tried to quit a number of times, but I can't break up with my league. It's one of my oldest college friends, my best college friends, and I just can't, as much as I don't care about fantasy football, it's like breaking up with the people that I can't do. That I haven't been able to do. And it's been tempting because I keep myself way too busy. You know, I was in this league before I started having kids, and since I started playing in this fantasy league, I've had kids, I've switched jobs, I've moved 3 times, I started writing for Waiting for Next Year, I started podcasting for Waiting for Next Year, we started covering live events. I mean, you start to think about all the things that you've committed to, and it doesn't feel like you ever give up as many things as what you take on in your lives. I don't know if everybody else feels this way, but back when I was single and then when I was newly married before we had kids, it's like, all right, you'd have things, and I had a band, and then you just keep taking on new things. You have kids, and then I started running, and I kept up with Waiting for Next Year, and you just add and add and add. And one of the things that I thought I could always subtract was fantasy football, and I've just not been able to do it. So another year goes by, another year that I have not broken up with my fantasy football league. So I'm starting to think about that draft, which we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks or whatever. We draft at the last possible minute, but it's got me thinking a lot about players. And I was thinking about running backs, especially because, you know, the Browns and the Ray Rice, and they've got young running backs, and we've talked about it here on this podcast and on the pages of Waiting for Next Year. But it reminds me that Marshawn Lynch, you know, when you're betting on a running back, it's easy to be an optimist for a long time. You know, I've had dalliances with running backs in fantasy, whether it's Marshawn Lynch, Chris Johnson. I seem to marry these running backs, and I have them for multiple years, and I play in a keeper league, so I can keep them around for a while. But ultimately, the best bet you can make on one of these running backs is to bet against them over time, because all running backs falter. You know, Maurice Jones-Drew was the greatest fantasy running back in the league, or one of the greatest, until he wasn't. Jamal Charles has been one of the best fantasy running backs in the league until he's not going to be anymore. And so I have that feeling right now. I don't know if it's going to be this year with Marshawn Lynch, and I've had Marshawn Lynch off and on for probably the last 4 years. I think I've had him 3 times over the last 4 years. I've had him on my team. And I don't know if this is the year that he falls off and he's not going to be good anymore. But this is from this point, he's like crossed that line for me now, where I'm no longer going to bet on Marshawn Lynch. And it almost feels bad, because I like Marshawn Lynch. The reason that I wanted to pick him up was because he was productive on the stat line, but also because I love the way he runs, and I love the attitude and all that other stuff. But at a certain point in time, the NFL doesn't pay off for anybody who's sentimental. You know, you just don't get to, certainly not with running backs, but pretty much any position. You can't bet on a guy long term. Eventually you get punished for betting on a guy. And that kind of bleeds right into the Ray Rice conversation. And that's even beyond all the non-football stuff, because it's really hard to explain the non-football stuff other than, hey, even if he's turned his own life around, I don't have to spend my time rooting for that guy. And I hope the Browns don't put me in a position where I have to spend some time rooting for that guy to succeed. I mean, ultimately, if they pick him up and he remains eligible and plays for the Cleveland Browns, I'm going to want him to run for 140 yards a week in a weird, generic kind of way, because there's just no other way. I'm never going to full on boycott the Cleveland Browns. It's just not going to happen. But I hope the team just doesn't put me in that position. I don't want to root for Ray Rice. But the easiest way to think about it is from a football perspective, and it's what's normally kind of wrong about when I'm talking about Marshawn Lynch, a guy that I want to root for, and having to him cross that threshold where I can no longer bet on him anymore. It's actually working to my favor with Ray Rice. I mean, how many times are you going to bet on a guy who's headed toward his 30th birthday with a ton of carries and yards on his resume already and assume that his best days are in front of him? I mean, never. It never happens like that. The Kurt Warner effect, where a quarterback struggles through and is bagging groceries and then shows up, and it's this combination of enough physical ability left in the tank plus some football smarts that's been developed experience over time, and it culminates into a superstar quarterback for a period of time like Kurt Warner did later on. Doesn't happen with running backs. And so that's what makes the Ray Rice thing all that more simple for me. Is like, yeah, Ray Rice might have another Pro Bowl season left in him. He might have two, but he doesn't. You're not going to bet on this guy long term, and the NFL has taught us that you're not going to bet on pretty much any running back long term. Other than Adrian Peterson, there is no such thing as a franchise running back. And even, I mean, let's be honest. Look at Adrian Peterson, as good as he's been. When does he cross that threshold that I'm talking about with Marshawn Lynch, where you stop betting on him? If you're in fantasy and you've got to find, I mean, obviously everybody's scoring is different, but if you've got to bet on a player and you've got to pick one for the next 5 years, are you betting on Adrian Peterson or are you betting on Andrew Luck? It just, at a certain point, it's are you going to bet on 4 years from now, Adrian Peterson or Isaiah Crowell? And we don't. I hate to even bring up the Browns' young running backs because they might not even be. They're probably not great, but they might not even be good. We don't even know this yet. We're in the second year of Terrence West and Isaiah Crowell, and so it's easy to think that they'd be better off with Ray Rice, but I just don't see it that way. Running backs in their late 20s are kind of beyond that threshold where you should bet on them going forward. And I don't think that the Browns are in a situation right now where I want them treading water with players and player groups. It's not a situation where I need a guy who is the difference between not making the playoffs and making the playoffs. I think the Browns should win as many games as they possibly can. But in the ultimate keeper league, which the NFL is, the ultimate keeper league with a 53-man roster, I think the Browns are in one of those spots where they're still better off keeping a younger guy with some upside. And over the course of this preseason with cuts and everything else that's going to be going on, that's the other part of it. Ray Rice might seem like the best possible running back option right now, but there are a lot of guys putting a lot of things on tape right now around the NFL in preseason, and they're going to get cut. And so if the Browns need somebody to step in and be the third or fourth running back because they're not feeling good about Crowell, West, Duke Johnson, and Sean Drone, they're going to be able to find a guy. There's going to be a Bobby Rainey out there. The 2015 version of Bobby Rainey who can step in behind an excellent Cleveland Browns offensive line and run the ball like crazy. So I'm just not. That's kind of where my head is on that whole thing. Which brings me to over the weekend, kind of as a result of the Browns' preseason game against Washington, Mike Pettine was talking about Justin Gilbert because Justin Gilbert said something silly. He said other than the one route where he got caught looking in the backfield and Pierre Garçon got behind him, ultimately Pierre Garçon dropped the bomb from RG3, and so it didn't even hurt the Browns. But Justin Gilbert said other than that, he felt that he was flawless. And Mike Pettine now famously has said, well, Justin said that before he'd seen the film, which the game film. And it was kind of this hysterical, I'm sure it wasn't hysterical for the beat reporters who were there at the time, because Mike Pettine said it pretty plaintively and then just followed it up with silence. And I'm sure he was just kind of looking around the room. And that silence speaks a million things. But I think, and I don't think Justin Gilbert had a great game, but I think we've probably gone too far the other way in terms of criticizing Justin Gilbert because he had such a poor performance his rookie season, and certainly his maturity and off-the-field stuff contributed to that. But I think that we've probably gone a little bit too far the other way negative, where I've seen Justin Gilbert and like physically, from a physical standpoint, he's got something extra. You can see what the Browns saw when they decided to pull the trigger on draft day and take him. And maybe they overdrafted him, and maybe there were better players there. I mean, certainly you can play that game on every draft pick every year and pick out a guy who could have done better than the guy you picked. But Justin Gilbert still has that elite physical ability, and I just think that it's a matter of development and confidence. I think that rookie year probably didn't help his confidence any either. And so the one thing that I'm really looking forward to is the experience of watching Justin Gilbert as a kickoff returner. And now I know a lot of people think that that's crazy to have a first-round pick, especially a high first-round pick, known for being a cornerback, returning kicks or whatever. But in Justin Gilbert's case, especially after the way his rookie year went, I think it's a really good idea, especially because I think he can really excel at that job. And that's really the most important thing for Justin Gilbert right now, is to excel at anything. And I think that and that's just my opinion. I don't know that to be a fact, but this is where my head is right now, that I think just allowing him to excel at any one thing is going to pay dividends at the other things that we want him to do well. And I think that he needs a win. You know, sometimes in life you come across somebody and they're so used to losing, and they just need a W. And I think Justin Gilbert, and yes, he made a lot of his own problems. He's his own worst enemy in a lot of ways, but I think he just needs a W. And I think that he can get that in the return game, and it'll pay dividends in the cover game when they ask him to finally get out and play corner. When it is that they'll ask him to start at corner is anybody's guess, though, because Tramon Williams looks very good. I like K1 Williams from last year. Pierre Desir is hurt right now, but he's obviously played pretty well in camp, and the Browns like the way he's playing as well. So we'll see. But Justin Gilbert as return man kind of gives me a little hope that maybe he can get that win that he needs to build his confidence for everything else. Because once over half of these the abilities, over half of the game mentally is having confidence, feeling good and knowing you can do it. I mean, if these guys are scared or questioning or wondering if they're doing the right thing, that's when you take the God-given ability of a player and you just squander it. And so that's year 2 in the defense, and hopefully with a win in another position group. I think that might pay dividends for Justin Gilbert. All right, last but not least, on a personal note, I have to do a little bit of bragging. I actually won a race this weekend, and granted, I can only. It was a 5K. It was a running race. The only kind of race that I can win, I mean, I think I've become a pretty good runner, but the only race that I can win is one that's not well attended. I mean, I know that for a fact. When the real elite runners show up, I don't get to win a race. It just doesn't happen. But I was running a charitable race. There was a charity race this weekend to benefit CDLK 5 or something. There's too many letters. I got to look it up. But so it was a charity race, and the difference between, there are different races. Okay, there's real competitive races, and then there are weekend charity races, and this was definitely more of the charity side race. I mean, when people show up at the Race for the Cure, it's more about how big of a team you have and whether your matching T-shirts look good as you're raising a bunch of money for the cause, which is really great. You know, it's cancer funding, and it's survivors, and it's not, the race is secondary. They have the race so they have an excuse to get all those people together, and that's what it was this weekend. But that doesn't tend to bring out your big competitive field of runners. And so this weekend, the field of runners was especially uncompetitive, and I was able to win the race. And I went out fast, and I led it from the very beginning to the end, and it was so much fun. I've never won a race before. And even knowing that it was like a whatever kind of a race, it was so much fun. It was interesting from the perspective of that it was a small race, so there was I'd never run it before. I didn't know where I was going, so I had to pay attention to the signs. Usually, what I do when I'm running a race, especially when I'm running one for the first time, is I'm following somebody else who knows where they're going. With the signs and everything else, somebody who knows the course. And in this case, everybody else was kind of following me, but every time I came across a sign, I had to do some mental gymnastics to figure out, okay, that's the sign for the 5K, goes left, okay, and keep going. And it was just a lot of fun, and it was a good cause. I'll link up the cause in the description so you guys can see it. But that's, other than that, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is, it all feels like non sequiturs here at the end, you know, where I finish on the Browns and Justin Gilbert, and then I tell you guys about winning my race, and now I'm going to complain about something. Not really complain, but something that I notice as a podcaster now. And some people who've been on the podcast with me will know that after I'm done talking to them, they're like, oh, I hope I was good. I hope that was okay. And quite frequently, I'll give them a comment like, well, it was really good. You're not the kind of person who, you don't have a lot of verbal tics. And that's really how I judge a lot of these podcasters. And I'm sure I have a lot of verbal tics. I attack them all the time whenever I realize I have one. For a while, one of my biggest things was, instead of transitioning or finding a good way of transitioning in or out of a topic, I would say anyway, I'm the king of anyway. I say it all the time, but anyway. And that's not a real transition. That's not a good way to get in and out of things, but that's kind of the way that I've done them over time. It was a bad habit. And so I've tried to break myself of it. But I was listening to some podcasts over the weekend, and I was listening to Tim Ferriss with Whitney Cummings. And first of all, it was a little bit obnoxious. It was like a big, long, humble brag, you know, about where she talked about being a perfectionist and how she went months at a time not talking to anybody but people who were on her payroll. And like, I believe all those things are true, but it just came off bad. But on top of it all, on top of all that, and I'm not here to just, you know, shit all over somebody else for their podcast, because there was a lot of interesting things in that conversation anyway. It just, you know, I'm not a big follower of Whitney Cummings in her career, so it just seemed a little bit stark to it was almost like accepting an award in a lot of ways. She was talking about how she goes about her work with her lifetime achievements and stuff. And if you're not fully integrated into that world and you know all about her career and whatever she's achieved, it seems like this weird thing, like a bunch of people are celebrating something and you don't know anything about it. But the other thing that struck me, and she's a performer who relies on speaking to people in the public, but she's got this one bad verbal tic which was driving me crazy. And it's this upward tilt or lilt at the end of all the sentences. And she'd be like, and so then I'd go to the restaurant and I would order something from the waiter. And then after they deliver the food, and everything she talked about, it's felt like it was going up at the end. And it's probably not that big of a deal. And I hope that I didn't just ruin something for the rest of you, where now you're listening to podcasts and you hear somebody kind of lilt up at the end of the sentence. Between that one and there's a lot of the intellectual crowd, especially like a Nate Silver, any of the people in the analytics, they got into a bad habit. I noticed this at the MIT Sloan conference, where they would end every sentence with the verbal version of a comma space, right? ? And so, and it would be like, so it's normally a good idea to draft Marshawn Lynch in your fantasy draft, right? But you wouldn't want to draft Ray Rice, right? And so it's this kind of self-affirmative ending to every sentence, and it changes it. I don't even know. There's some. It's fake self-affirming in a way, because whether or not people agree with you or not, you've pretty much gone and made them, you've put them in a yes or a no question. Either they say you're right or you're wrong. And so you could say something really complex and be like, well, you're partially right, but no. Now they've reduced it to a yes or no question at the end of every sentence. And so these are the things that I notice. I once listened to an interview with an offensive coordinator who had retired. I can't even remember which one, but he said that the game of football was ruined for him. Like, he couldn't even enjoy watching the game of football anymore because he would just notice every little thing. His view of the game was not that of a fan anymore. It was so hyper analyzing and deep down in the details that he couldn't enjoy a game of football anymore. And sometimes I feel that way with podcasts, where I'm listening to them from a technical perspective. I'm a big fan of the Bomani Jones podcast. I mean, I know it's a show on ESPN radio, but they put the podcast in at the end. And so I was listening to it for weeks. And at the end of this one segment in the middle of the show, before they play the Geico commercial, there would be a 20-second pause. And I'm just like, somebody's not editing out. Somebody's editing improperly. And then on top of that, then I would hear the Geico commercial, and it would be 20 decibels louder than the talk that had preceded it. And I'm like, man, that's just really bad production. It's blowing my ears out, blowing out my car speakers. And so, I remember a few months ago, somebody had said to me that the intro to this podcast was way too loud compared to my voice when I'd come in at the end. And so I promptly started, shrinking back that or dialing back that intro and outro so that I wasn't blasting people's ears out even before we started talking. And so I try and pay attention to that stuff. But now, even when I'm listening to podcasts that I'm trying to enjoy, I end up kind of hyper analyzing the production and all these other things that probably shouldn't or don't really matter when it comes to the art form of delivering spoken media, spoken content, whatever it is. So anyway, that's the Monday morning podcast. That's all I've got. If you have any production notes for me, if I'm massively screwing something up and you notice that maybe this could be a better listening experience from a technical perspective, throw it out to me on Twitter, because I won't take offense. I won't get upset. unless you tell me that you don't like any of my topics and you don't like the tone of my voice, things that I can't fix. But if there's something that you notice that I can fix and you want to tell me about it, I'll be happy to consider it. I love the feedback. It's been a lot of fun over the last few weeks podcasting and giving you guys secret words to send to me, questions of the day, things like that. Today, and granted, I'm not going to hold you to it. Okay, I'm giving you your secret response, your feedback of the day. I hate making predictions about how many wins the Browns are going to have, and this isn't so much a prediction as it is a measure of your confidence right now, or your feelings right now. I'm not going to lock it down and say, well, you're stupid because you thought the Browns were only going to win 4 games. Or I'm not going to call you dumb because you thought they could win 14. I want to know after one preseason game and watching Josh McCown and the Browns' limited roster, obviously Joe Thomas and Joe Hayden didn't even play. I just want to know where you are in terms of win total. I've been saying that I think that this is a baseline, probably a 7 or an 8 win team. And then everything else is health and luck and good fortune. And yeah, you make your own luck, but a lot of it's going to be luck. So we'll see. But that's all I want. So tweet at me at WFNY Craig. Leave a comment on the WFNY Podcast Facebook page somewhere. Just give me a number. Don't say anything else. And if you tweet a number at me, I'll know that's the number of wins you're feeling like with the Browns right now. And if it's 0, if it's 16, don't feel bad about it. This is not about you being right or wrong. This is about your feelings and your confidence level right now. So thanks so much for listening. Please share it with a friend. All you have to do is go on the WFNY podcast page and share that link to your friends. Tell them that it stinks. I don't care. Just share it. Whatever you feel like saying about it, share it. That'll make me feel better about myself. Find some links that I send around Twitter. Share that with your friends. Subscribe on iTunes. Do all those things for me. And someday, if we ever get sponsors, I'll find ways to get prizes and give back. So that'll be you guys are paying in advance for something that might or might not happen in the future. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy your week. I'll talk to you a couple times this week. This has been the WaitingForNextYear.com podcast.
Waiting for next year.